Medicine is full of accidental discoveries. You have penicillin, X-rays, even the pacemaker. Scientists set out looking for one answer and sometimes discover something completely different. So this is one of those stories. It begins with a Nobel Prize. It passes through the human nose and it ends up with humming. And along the way, it teaches us something not only about the human body, but about how scientific discoveries really evolve. Our story begins in the early 1990s. Researchers had become fascinated by a tiny gas called nitric oxide, one nitrogen atom and one oxygen atom. Just to avoid confusion, this is nitric oxide, not nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide is the laughing gas used by dentists. So for many years, nitric oxide, NO, had been regarded as little more than an environmental pollutant. Then scientists discovered something extraordinary. Our own bodies manufacture it continuously, and it acts as one of the body's most important signaling molecule. So this molecule helps blood vessels relax, allows cells to communicate with one another, and plays important roles throughout the body. So those discoveries changed physiology forever. In 1998, Murad, Vergot, and Ignaro were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for discovering nitric oxide as an important signaling molecule in the body. You might think that that was the end of the story. In fact, it is only the beginning. If you enjoy straightforward, evidence-based health information without the hype, I'd be delighted if you subscribe. New videos every week. Now let's get back to the story, to the first mystery. Once scientists realized how important nitric oxide was, they began measuring the tiny amounts people breathed out. That's when they noticed something they couldn't explain. People breathing out through their noses had remarkably high concentrations of nitric oxide. Not just a little higher, but much higher. The next obvious question was simple. Where was it coming from? So in 1995, a landmark paper published in Nature Medicine answered that mystery. Not the lungs, the paranasal sinuses. Those small air-filled spaces hidden inside the bones around the nose continuously produce extraordinary high concentrations of nitric oxide, among the highest naturally occurring concentrations found anywhere in the body. So one mystery had been solved. It immediately created another. The second mystery. If the sinuses, the paranasal sinuses, contain so much nitric oxide, could they somehow release more of it? So 7 years later, another paper asked an almost childishly simple question. What happens if people simply hum? The result astonished everyone. So during humming, nitric oxide measured inside the nose increased around 15 times. Not 15%, 15-fold. It was one of those beautifully elegant experiments where a simple observation suddenly revealed something entirely unexpected about the human body. The explanation is surprisingly simple. So normally, nitric oxide slowly diffuses from the sinuses into the nasal cavity through tiny openings. Humming. Humming creates rapid pressure oscillations that exchange the air inside the sinuses with the air inside the nose much more efficiently. Think of it as gently swirling a bottle instead of leaving it completely still. So humming doesn't suddenly manufacture more nitric oxide. It rapidly releases what is already there. That one experiment transformed humming into an everyday behavior, into a fascinating subject for physiology research. Researchers later found that people with blocked sinuses openings showed a much smaller response with humming. The humming maneuver itself became another way of studying how well the sinuses were ventilating. So far, everything is simply good signs. It was around this point that the story became personal for me. Our choir is currently releasing an extraordinary work by the Estonian composer Oremus called Oremus. Much of it begins with a sustained hum before opening into a beautiful flowing vowels. I'll show it to you here. So it opens with a hum, and this is the second page of the music, and then it breaks into a beautiful flowing modulation of vowels in the one tone. As I practiced it, I found myself wondering whether humming and chanting found in so many musical and spiritual traditions had ever been studied scientifically. Not because I was expecting humming to be a miracle therapy, but because I was curious whether there was more happening inside the body than we realized. To my surprise, there was. Not because scientists were studying meditation, not because they were studying music, simply because they were trying to understand how the nose works. I find that wonderfully satisfying. So, the third mystery: if humming dramatically increases nitric oxide inside the nose, does it actually improve health? That's an entirely reasonable scientific question. So, nitric oxide already had an impressive scientific reputation. It helps regulate blood vessels. Our immune cells produce it as part of our defense against infection. Doctors even administer inhaled nitric oxide in specialized hospital settings for certain serious medical conditions. So it was perfectly reasonable to ask whether humming might also have a measurable health benefit. Researchers began exploring questions about sinus ventilation, breathing, relaxation, and respiratory physiology. Some ideas are biologically plausible, some are supported by early evidence, others remain unanswered. That is exactly how science progresses. One discovery generates another question. As often happens in medicine, however, one fascinating discovery gradually led to wider possibilities. Some scientifically reasonable, others became increasingly ambitious. Before long, humming was being promoted as a way to boost immunity, kill viruses, detoxify the body, stimulate the vagus nerve, even slowing aging and treat disease. Could some of those ideas eventually prove partly true? Perhaps. Could others turn out to be wrong? Quite possible. At the moment, we simply don't know. That's an important distinction. A fascinating biological mechanism is not the same thing as convincing clinical evidence. A plausible hypothesis is not the same thing as a proven treatment. The original discovery remains elegant, important, and scientifically sound. What remains uncertain is how much that discovery changes our health in everyday life. As for humming itself, people have hummed, chanted, and sung for thousands of years. Long before anyone knew that nitric oxide existed, many cultures discovered that these vocal traditions could produce calmness, beauty, focus, and a sense of connection with the cosmos, with the universe, with God. And whether nitric oxide explains even a small part of those experiences remains an open question. It may contribute. It may only be one small piece of a much larger picture involving breathing, attention, music, resonance, and the human brain. In another video, I explored how choir singing may help build brain reserve, support healthy aging. That's a different story, but another reminder that music can influence our health in many different ways, not all of which depends on a single molecule. Every scientific discovery gives us two things: an answer and a new question. This story answered one remarkable question about the human nose, but in doing so, it opened many more questions about breathing, humming, music, and health. Some of those questions already have answers, many still don't. Now, every time our choir begins Oremus with that single quiet hum, I hear it a little differently. I don't just hear music anymore. I find myself wondering, in awe, thinking about a remarkable scientific journey from a tiny molecule, nitric oxide, hidden inside our own sinuses, to a Nobel Prize, to one of the simplest experiments imaginable. It is a reminder that some of the most beautiful discoveries begin with the simplest questions.